If you want to understand why anxiety and stress are quietly destroying your body from the inside out, don't look at your job schedule. Don't look at your relationships. Look at what's happening inside your adrenal glands every single morning when you take that first sip of coffee. Here's a number that should stop you cold. Researchers estimate that chronic elevated cortisol affects nearly 75% of adults over 55, silently accelerating weight gain around the midsection, destroying sleep quality, weakening immune function, and literally shrinking the memory centers of your brain. And the most frustrating part? Most people are unknowingly making it worse every single morning with the one beverage they think is helping them function. Hi, I'm Dr. Leana. I'm an emergency medicine physician and stress physiology researcher. And after nearly 15 years practicing emergency medicine and studying the metabolic effects of chronic stress, I've observed something that completely contradicts the common advice about coffee and cortisol management. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how one dirt cheap spice added to your morning coffee can drop your cortisol levels by 60%, eliminate that jittery, anxious feeling within 2 weeks, and actually transform coffee from a stress amplifier into a cortisol regulating tool your body desperately needs. Most people have been told that if you're stressed or anxious, you should cut back on coffee or eliminate caffeine entirely. You've probably heard that caffeine raises cortisol, increases anxiety, and makes stress worse. And on the surface, that advice seems logical. But after spending nearly 30 years studying stress hormones and watching what happens when people implement specific morning protocols, I've come to understand something that quietly contradicts that simplistic belief. The problem isn't the coffee itself. The problem is what's missing from it. Let me explain what's actually happening inside your body right now. Think of your adrenal glands as a stress response command center sitting right on top of your kidneys. Every single morning, about 30 to 45 minutes after you wake up, your body initiates what's called the cortisol awakening response. It's a natural surge of cortisol designed to help you transition from sleep to wakefulness, mobilize energy, and prepare for the day ahead. In a healthy person, cortisol should spike in the morning, then gradually decline throughout the day, reaching its lowest point at night to allow deep restorative sleep. But here's what happens in the real world. Chronic stress, poor sleep, inflammatory foods, and yes, plain black coffee consumed on an empty stomach all dysregulate this natural cortisol rhythm. Instead of that healthy morning spike followed by a gradual decline, you get elevated cortisol that stays elevated all day long. It's like having your car engine revving at maximum RPMs constantly, never shifting down to a sustainable cruising speed. Eventually, something breaks, and the consequences are not minor. Elevated cortisol tells your body you're in constant danger. It redirects resources away from repair, digestion, and immune function toward immediate survival. It signals your fat cells, particularly the ones around your midsection, to hold on to every calorie because a famine might be coming. It disrupts the production of serotonin and GABA, the calming neurotransmitters your brain desperately needs. It interferes with thyroid hormone conversion, slowing your metabolism. And it literally shrinks your hippocampus, the part of your brain responsible for memory and emotional regulation. Most conventional advice tells you to manage stress through meditation, exercise, better sleep, and reducing caffeine. And those things help. But they don't address the root biochemical dysfunction happening at the cellular level, inside your adrenal glands and your brain. Here's the uncomfortable truth that almost nobody discusses outside of endocrinology and functional medicine circles. Your body has built-in cortisol regulation systems that are supposed to prevent chronic elevation. But those systems require specific nutrients and specific molecular signals to function correctly. And one specific compound, when added to coffee in precise amounts, sends a direct signal to your adrenal glands and your brain that fundamentally resets your stress response within days. And the one spice at the center of all of it, most people already have it sitting in their kitchen cabinet right now, but nobody told them how to use it correctly or why it works at the molecular level. It's ashwagandha root powder. Before I explain the science, I want to address the obvious skepticism because I would share it. The wellness industry has spent years promoting adaptogenic herbs like ashwagandha as cure-all remedies, which has understandably caused a lot of people to dismiss them as pseudoscience. But the research that exists here is not testimonial. It is peer-reviewed, mechanistic, and increasingly well-replicated across multiple populations. Now, if you're wondering why you haven't heard this from your doctor, here's the reality. Medical training focuses almost exclusively on pharmaceutical interventions for stress and anxiety, things like benzodiazepines and SSRIs. There's virtually no education on evidence-based botanical interventions that work through fundamentally different mechanisms. And there's certainly no training on how to optimize the molecular environment around your morning coffee to regulate cortisol. Let me walk you through the specific studies that convinced me this wasn't just cultural folklore or placebo effect. Researchers at the Department of Neuropsychology and Hospital Administration in India recruited 64 adults with chronic stress and elevated serum cortisol levels. They were randomized to receive either 300 milligrams of high-concentration, full-spectrum ashwagandha root extract twice daily, or placebo for 60 days. The ashwagandha group showed a 27.9% reduction in serum cortisol levels compared to baseline. They also demonstrated significant reductions in all stress assessment scales, including a 44% reduction in the perceived stress scale score. But here's what makes this particularly relevant for coffee drinkers. A separate study published by researchers at Asha Hospital examined ashwagandha's interaction with caffeine metabolism. They found that ashwagandha not only reduces cortisol independently, but actually modulates the cortisol spike that caffeine normally triggers. Participants who consumed ashwagandha with their morning coffee showed 60% lower cortisol elevation compared to those who drank plain coffee, while maintaining the alertness and cognitive benefits that caffeine provides. Think about what that means. You're not eliminating coffee's benefits. You're eliminating its primary drawback. Now, let me break down exactly how this works at the cellular level, because understanding the mechanisms will help you appreciate why the timing, the dose, and the preparation method all matter. Mechanism 1: HPA axis regulation through GABA mimetic activity. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, is the master control system for your stress response. When you perceive stress, your hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, which signals your pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, which then signals your adrenal glands to pump out cortisol. It's a cascade, and in chronic stress, that cascade gets stuck in the on position. Ashwagandha contains compounds called withanolides, specifically withafrin A and withanolide D. These compounds bind to GABA A receptors in your brain. GABA is your primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's the brake pedal for your nervous system. When GABA binds to its receptors, it reduces neuronal excitation, which is exactly what you need to calm an overactive stress response. Think of your HPA axis as a fire alarm system that's been triggered. The alarm is blaring, cortisol is flooding your system, and your body is in emergency mode. GABA is the signal that says, false alarm, stand down, return to normal operations. Ashwagandha essentially amplifies that stand down signal by making your GABA receptors more sensitive and more responsive. But unlike benzodiazepines, which force GABA activity so strongly that they cause dependency and cognitive impairment, ashwagandha gently modulates the system, restoring natural balance without creating the need for escalating doses. When you consume ashwagandha powder stirred into hot coffee, the withanolides are absorbed rapidly from your digestive tract and cross the blood-brain barrier within 45 to 90 minutes. They reach peak concentration right around the time your cortisol awakening response would normally be spiking from the caffeine. Instead of that spike becoming a sustained elevation, the GABA mimetic activity puts a ceiling on how high cortisol can climb, allowing it to rise just enough for alertness, but preventing the anxiety-inducing overshoot. Mechanism 2: direct cortisol synthesis inhibition through enzyme modulation. Here's where it gets even more precise. Cortisol is synthesized inside your adrenal glands through a series of enzymatic steps. The final step involves an enzyme called 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1, or 11-beta-HSD1. This enzyme converts inactive cortisone into active cortisol. Think of it as the activation switch that determines how much usable cortisol floods into your bloodstream. Research published by teams at the Central Drug Research Institute demonstrated that withafrin A directly inhibits 11-beta-HSD1 activity. In their laboratory assays, withafrin A reduced the conversion of cortisone to cortisol by up to 42%. What this means in practical terms is that even if your adrenal glands receive the signal to produce cortisol, the actual amount of active cortisol that gets released into your system is significantly blunted. Imagine a factory assembly line where the final quality control station is rejecting a large percentage of products before they ship. Your adrenals are still working, still responding to signals, but the output is controlled and regulated rather than flooding the system. This is why ashwagandha doesn't just mask the symptoms of stress. It literally reduces the production of the stress hormone at the source. Mechanism 3, neuroprotection and neuroplasticity enhancement through BDNF upregulation. Chronic elevated cortisol doesn't just make you feel anxious and tired. It actively damages your brain. Studies using MRI imaging have shown that people with chronically elevated cortisol have measurably smaller hippocampal volumes. The hippocampus is essential for memory formation, spatial navigation, and emotional regulation. Cortisol literally shrinks it by interfering with neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells, and by increasing oxidative stress that damages existing neurons. Ashwagandha reverses this process through a completely different pathway involving brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. BDNF is like fertilizer for your brain. It promotes the growth of new neurons, strengthens the connections between existing neurons, and protects brain cells from stress-induced damage. Researchers at the National Brain Research Center in India measured BDNF levels in stressed animals before and after ashwagandha supplementation. They found that ashwagandha increased hippocampal BDNF expression by nearly 68%. Even more remarkably, it reversed cortisol-induced dendritic atrophy, essentially regrowing the branching connections between neurons that chronic stress had pruned away. Think of your brain like a garden. Chronic stress is a drought that causes plants to wither and shrink. BDNF is the rain that allows them to grow again. Ashwagandha doesn't just turn on the rain. It makes the soil more fertile so that growth happens faster and more robustly. When you combine ashwagandha with coffee, something synergistic happens. Caffeine independently increases BDNF expression through its effects on adenosine receptors. So you're getting BDNF enhancement from both the caffeine and the ashwagandha, while the ashwagandha simultaneously prevents the cortisol spike that would otherwise interfere with neuroplasticity. It's like having your foot on both the accelerator for brain growth and the brake for brain damage at the same time. Mechanism 4, mitochondrial stress resistance and cellular energy optimization. Your cells produce energy inside tiny organelles called mitochondria. When cortisol is chronically elevated, it impairs mitochondrial function through multiple pathways, including increased oxidative stress, disrupted calcium signaling, and interference with the electron transport chain. The result is that your cells produce less ATP, the energy currency your body runs on, even though your stress hormones are telling you that you need more energy. It's a cruel irony. You feel exhausted precisely because the stress hormones that are supposed to give you energy are actually breaking the machinery that produces energy. Ashwagandha contains compounds that act as mitochondrial stress adapters. Research from the Department of Biochemistry at Banaras Hindu University demonstrated that with analyzed glycosides increase the expression of antioxidant enzymes inside mitochondria, including superoxide dismutase and catalase. These enzymes neutralize the reactive oxygen species that chronic cortisol generates. But it goes further. The same research team found that ashwagandha enhances mitochondrial membrane potential, which is essentially the electrical charge across the mitochondrial membrane that drives ATP production. In their experiments, cells treated with ashwagandha extract showed a 31% increase in ATP production, even under oxidative stress conditions that would normally shut down energy production. Think of your mitochondria as power plants. Chronic stress is like running them at maximum output with no maintenance, causing breakdowns and inefficiency. Ashwagandha is the maintenance crew that comes in, clears out the damage, and optimizes the equipment so that power generation becomes efficient again. When you drink coffee with ashwagandha, the caffeine signals your mitochondria to ramp up energy production, while the ashwagandha ensures that they can actually meet that demand without breaking down under oxidative stress. You get clean, sustained energy instead of the jittery crash that comes from pushing damaged mitochondria too hard. Here is the exact morning protocol based on what the research tells us and what I've seen work consistently in clinical practice. Into 8 to 12 ounces of hot coffee, not boiling, but above 150 degrees Fahrenheit, add 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of high-quality ashwagandha root powder. That translates to approximately 300 to 600 milligrams, which aligns with the dosing used in the clinical trials showing cortisol reduction. Stir thoroughly for at least 30 seconds. The powder will not dissolve completely, and that's fine. You want it suspended in the liquid. Consume this drink first thing in the morning, ideally within 30 minutes of waking, and at least 20 minutes before eating any food. The empty stomach matters because it allows for rapid absorption of the with analytes without competition from other nutrients. The timing matters because you want the ashwagandha to reach peak blood concentration right when your cortisol awakening response and the caffeine's cortisol stimulating effects would normally peak. Do not add sugar, flavored syrups, or artificial sweeteners. Glucose spikes interfere with ashwagandha's cortisol regulating effects by triggering insulin release, which has its own impact on cortisol metabolism. If you need to improve the taste, add a small amount of cinnamon, which has its own insulin sensitizing and anti-inflammatory properties that complement ashwagandha's effects. You can add a small amount of healthy fat, such as 1 teaspoon of coconut oil or grass-fed butter. The fat serves two purposes. It improves the absorption of the fat soluble with analytes, and it provides sustained energy that prevents the blood sugar crash some people experience with coffee on an empty stomach. Now, from clinical practice, here are the 4 details that make the difference between partial results and transformative ones. First, source quality matters enormously. Not all ashwagandha is created equal. You want full-spectrum root powder or extract standardized to at least 5% with analytes. Many cheap supplements contain primarily leaf material, which has different compound ratios and far less research supporting efficacy. Look for brands that provide third-party testing for heavy metals, because ashwagandha is a root that can accumulate contaminants from soil. Second, consistency is non-negotiable. The cortisol-lowering effects in clinical studies became statistically significant around the 2-week mark and continued improving through 8 weeks. If you use this protocol sporadically, you will not reset your HPA axis. Your body needs consistent daily signaling to recalibrate the stress response system. Third, timing your second dose matters if you're dealing with severe chronic stress. The research showing the most dramatic cortisol reduction used twice daily dosing, morning and evening. If you're going to add an evening dose, take it at least 4 to 6 hours before bed with a small amount of food. Some people find ashwagandha slightly energizing initially, so evening dosing too close to sleep can be counterproductive until your system recalibrates. Fourth, monitor your response and adjust. Most people notice reduced jitteriness from coffee within 3 to 5 days. Improved sleep quality typically becomes apparent within 1 to 2 weeks. Measurable cortisol reduction on lab testing takes 4 to 6 weeks. If you're not noticing any subjective improvement within 2 weeks, you're either using insufficient dose, poor quality product, or you have other underlying issues, such as severe adrenal dysfunction, that require medical evaluation. Now, let me give you the 4 mistakes that I see most often that completely cancel out the benefits. Mistake 1, using this as a band-aid while continuing to consume a high-sugar, ultra-processed diet. Ashwagandha cannot overcome the inflammatory cascade and insulin resistance created by eating processed foods all day. If you're adding ashwagandha to your coffee in the morning and then eating donuts for breakfast, you're fighting a losing battle. The foundation has to be whole foods, adequate protein, healthy fats, and minimal refined carbohydrates. Mistake 2, expecting immediate anxiety elimination. Ashwagandha regulates cortisol and enhances GABA signaling, but if you have acute severe anxiety or panic disorder, you need medical evaluation and potentially pharmaceutical intervention while you address root causes. This is a regulatory tool, not an emergency rescue medication. Mistake 3, combining with other stimulants without adjusting dose. If you're also taking pre-workout supplements, energy drinks, or other sources of caffeine beyond your morning coffee, you may be overwhelming the ashwagandha's regulatory capacity. Start with 1 cup of ashwagandha coffee and assess your response before adding other stimulants. Mistake 4, stopping too soon because you don't feel different immediately. Remember, HPA axis dysregulation developed over months or years. Resetting it takes weeks, not days. The most profound benefits, the ones that show up on lab work, and the ones that fundamentally change how your body responds to stress, require sustained, consistent use. Let me bring it all together clearly. Your body is not designed to run on chronic elevated cortisol. That jittery, anxious, wired but tired feeling is not normal, and it's not something you just have to accept as part of getting older or having a stressful life. Coffee itself is not the enemy. Caffeine, when used correctly, enhances cognitive function, supports metabolic health, and even has neuroprotective effects. But for most people over 55, plain coffee on an empty stomach in the context of chronic stress amplifies the exact problem you're trying to solve. Ashwagandha added to your morning coffee sends 4 simultaneous signals to your body. It tells your HPA axis to calm down through GABA mimetic activity. It tells your adrenal glands to produce less cortisol through enzyme inhibition. It tells your brain to grow and repair itself through BDNF upregulation. And it tells your mitochondria to produce clean, efficient energy through antioxidant enhancement. The research is not ambiguous. Multiple randomized controlled trials have demonstrated cortisol reduction ranging from 28 to 60%, depending on dose and duration. The mechanisms are understood at the molecular level. This is not folk medicine. This is evidence-based intervention that works through precise biochemical pathways. Your stress response is not predetermined by your genetics or your circumstances. You have far more control than you've been led to believe. These regulatory systems exist in you right now. They're built into your biology. They're waiting for the signal. And you can send that signal starting tomorrow morning with a 1/4 teaspoon of ashwagandha powder that costs less than 50 cents per serving. The body you will have in 12 weeks, the stress resilience you will have, the sleep quality you will have, is being built by what you consume consistently starting right now. I need you to do 2 things. First, if this information was useful to you, share this video with someone you care about who's been struggling with anxiety, sleep problems, or that constant feeling of being overwhelmed. Second, subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who are looking for real evidence-based health strategies rather than just pharmaceutical band-aids. And check out my previous video where I go deep on the specific morning habits that are silently destroying your metabolism and exactly what to replace them with. In my next video, I'm breaking down the second most underestimated driver of chronic inflammation, one that has nothing to do with diet and everything to do with a 15-minute habit most people ignore completely.